Today guys, I'm going to show you how we can build a timeline using Elementor Free or Pro. So this is the effect here. There's no extra plugins required and the code you'll need in the video description. But the line animates on scroll, and we've also got an active state for this icon here and this meta text. So it changes color, it turns into a solid active color. And I'll also show you how we can basically give anything an active state, such as headings or the card itself. We can change the full color when it becomes active. The timeline's also fully responsive. So you'll see here on inspect on mobile, it breaks to the left. So when the screen becomes too narrow, the timeline breaks by default to the left. But on wider screens, it's center aligned. But I say by default because this timeline, I've built it using a classes system, which means you can build it once, but by using a combination of 6 different classes, it gives us 21 different layout options from this one timeline. So before we get into the build, I'll show you basically how it works. So I'll put all the classes on the screen now, but I'm in my main parent timeline container, and we're just going to type the classes in this CSS classes box. So the first one to show you is overriding the break behavior of the timeline. So I showed you earlier, it by default breaks to the left. So if I want to override that and break it to the right, I'd simply type break right, and on tablet portrait, the timeline will now break to the right. So the next one to show you is flip. So in its default state, the timeline, the content starts on the left with the meta information on the right. Whereas if I type flip, it now reverses it, and the content now starts on the right with the meta information on the left, and it follows through down to the rest of your timeline items. So that's flip. And now if I type left, the timeline's fully aligned left, and it'll be in this state all the way down to mobile. And then similarly, right works in the same way. The timeline aligns itself right, and it works all the way down to mobile again. So that's left and right. And then the next 2 classes are top and bottom. So if I type top, the meta information and the point and this little arrow, they now align to the top on every item. And again, same sort of thing. Bottom now aligns everything to the bottom. So I mentioned earlier, we've got 21 different layout options, and that's the beauty of this timeline because you've built it once and you can combine these classes. So if I leave bottom in there and type left, we've now got a bottom left aligned timeline. Say you want the timeline to be flipped and then you want the points and meta information at the top. This is how we can do that. We can just type our classes in. So we've got 21 different options because we can combine classes exactly how we want. The only classes I've left out of the combination count are basically classes you wouldn't use together, such as left and right or top and bottom. But by using these classes, it means we can create designs like this, because this is a top left aligned timeline that fits nicely within one column of a 2-column layout. So you can see how reusable this timeline is, because you can basically make it fit any design or layout that you're working with. And now I'll show you how easy it is to build. So this is a new blank page I've started for my timeline. I've just got an empty container in here and named it timeline. I've got my content width set to boxed, but boxed or full width will work, so that's up to you. And I've set the direction to column vertical. The gaps, I've set the row to 40 because that's this gap here. So you'll see it says 40. You can set it basically to whatever you want, but just remember, if you set it to 0 here, that the timeline does break to the left. So you will need a gap, otherwise your content boxes will be touching each other. But for now, I've just set mine to 40. Within style, I haven't set anything up, but you can give your timeline a background if you want. I quite like my site background, so I'll just leave that as empty. I've added padding top and bottom of 50 rem. You can ignore this. I've just applied this, so I've got some scrolling space because I'm just building this on a blank page. And then the only thing you'll need to do is give your timeline, your main timeline container, a CSS class of my-timeline. Now we can add our first timeline item. So right click the timeline container, add a new container, and just rename this timeline item 1. Leave it as a full width content width, direction set to row, and then a line item set to center, and we'll give a column gap of 25 pixel. And this is this gap here between the icon and the meta information and the content. So that's 25 pixel. I do tend to reduce it slightly for mobile, so just click on the mobile screen size, and I do tend to reduce this to about 20 pixel because you've got less room to work with on mobile. So go back to desktop, and then within the advanced tab, just give this a class of timeline hyphen item. So we now need to add 3 elements to our timeline item container. So the first one is another container that I'm just going to rename content, because this is going to house the content. And then after this, we need to add an icon. So this will be a sibling of the content container because it will sit next to it. And then finally, we just need to add a heading. So now we've got our 3 elements. I'm going to style up the content container. So we'll leave this as full width, but we'll set it to 35%. And to make sure this remains as 35% all the way down to mobile, just click on the mobile breakpoint and set 35% again. So now it'll be 35% on every screen size. Within style, these are completely personal preference, but you can set any background color you want. I'm going to go for a global color I've got set up. So this is a dark color in my global settings. I'm going to give it a border, again optional, but I'm going to go for a solid 2 pixel border with a 12 pixel border radius, and I'm going to choose a lighter border color here. So then after this, within advanced, again, this is a personal preference, but I want my card to have padding of 1.5 rem on every side. So I'll just link these up. And then final thing to do is just make sure the size is set to grow. So this is important. Make sure you set it to grow and give your content box a class of timeline item card. Now for the icon. So we'll click on the icon and select whatever icon you want. So I'm going to search for calendar and insert this. And then style wise, I want mine to be white. So I've got a global white color and I want the size to be 20 pixel. I want it slightly smaller on mobile because we are working with less room. So I'll give it 18 pixel size on mobile. So then back to desktop, I'm going to give this a padding on every side of 10 pixel. And again, I'm going to go to the mobile breakpoint and reduce this slightly to 8 pixel on every side. Because yeah, we are working with slightly less room. So back to desktop, I'm going to give this a class of timeline hyphen item hyphen point. So that's important that you give it the exact same class name to make sure it works. Background wise, this background is for our icon in its inactive state. So for me, I've got this off-white color, so it's slightly grayed out. And then a border, I want to give it a solid border, 4 pixel width. And I'm going to make this border white. And I'm also going to give a border radius of 50 pixel to give it a circular look. But this isn't circular at the minute, it's slightly oval, but the custom CSS will fix this. Now for your heading or meta text, just click on your heading. I'm going to paste in this date. Choose whatever HTML tag you want. I'm going to choose H3. Within style, I'm going to choose a global typography that I've got set up for timeline subheading. And then text color, make sure this is your inactive color that you want. Like the icon, we're setting this up in its inactive state. So I've got this off-white color. Then within advanced, make sure you set this width up as custom and 35% and also set the size to grow. And what we've done here is made it match the content container to make sure everything's centrally aligned. And finally, just give this a class of timeline hyphen item hyphen meta. Once you've added this, exactly the same. Once you've added that, just copy and paste the heading inside the content container and then go into advanced and set the width to this one to default. And what we're doing here is adding the heading or the meta text in all the places where it can be. Because if you remember the timeline in its default state, when it's center aligned, the meta text is external to the content container. It's here on the right hand side or on the left. But if the if the timeline breaks or is left or right aligned, the meta heading is inside the content container. So what we need to do is add it in both places, and then we'll deal with the visibility of this with some custom CSS we'll add later. So now just basically add whatever you want to your timeline item. So just add your elements. You might have a heading, a text editor, an image. And this is the beauty of building it yourself with containers, because unlike a plugin, we can dictate whatever we want inside our timeline items. So what I'll do now is I'll just cut to mine with all the elements added and styled up exactly as I want them. So once you've finished adding all the elements you want to your content container, we can now close down the main timeline item container. And what we're going to do is right click on this one and duplicate it. And this is going to be our timeline item number 2. Now for timeline item 2, we just need to rejig a few things so it's the correct structure. So drag the heading above the icon and drag the content below the icon, just so it now works in reverse. And then click on the heading and set this under style, set the alignment to right, just so it pushes it towards the center. And now what we've got is basically a template for our odd timeline items and our even timeline items. I know I've got 4 items, so I'm going to duplicate number 1 and 2 again once each. So for timeline item 1, once I've duplicated this, this is also going to be timeline item 3, and I can now drag this below number 2. And then for timeline item number 4, I'm just going to duplicate number 2. And then once I've done this, I'll just rename it in the structure tree, timeline item 4, and drag it below timeline item number 3. Once you've done this for however many number of items you have, you've basically got your timeline structure coming together, and you'll just have to go into each item and tweak the content to basically whatever you want it to say. So what I'll do now is I'll just cut to my timeline with all the content tweaked. So once you've finished tweaking your timeline content, you're now ready to add the actual line itself. So click on your main timeline parent container, and we're going to add a new container. So it should fit, it should go straight underneath timeline item 4. So I'm just going to rename it line, and then I'm going to change the width to 4 pixel. So this is up to you, whatever width you want your line to be, but I'm choosing 4 pixel because this matches the border width of my icons. And then go straight to mobile portrait, and again set up your width because it will go full width. So I'm setting it again to 4 pixel. So now back to desktop. If your line does look thicker at this point, it'll be because of padding. Don't worry about this because the custom CSS will fix this. But now go straight into the advanced tab and rename this, or give it a class rather, of timeline-line. Once you've done that, set the position to absolute and just delete the 2 zeros. And then your line should sit up here in the top corner. Don't worry about that at the minute. That's exactly where we want it to be for now. Now we're going to add our custom code. So there'll be a link to this code in the video description. But if you're a pro user, just copy all the custom CSS in here and paste it inside your main timeline container. Go to advanced and paste it inside custom CSS. So that's where you want to add the code. If you're not a pro user, click on the main timeline, add a new HTML element, and then within here, just add a couple of style tags like this. So an open tag and a close tag, and then paste the code in here. And then you'll have to swap everywhere you see the word selector, swap this for .my-timeline. So it's quite tedious, but just swap them out and just be wary that in some places, like down here, where there isn't a space, make sure you don't add a space. So instead of selector.left, it'll be .my-timeline.left, like that. So just swap all them out, and that's if you've not got a pro account. So because I'm using pro, I'm just going to delete this. But again, if you're using free, that's where you want to add it. But what we will need in here, whether you're using free or pro, is some script tags. So if you're using free, just add these script tags underneath the style tags you've just added. But yeah, this is for free and pro users. Go back to the custom code, select all the JavaScript and paste it in between the script tags. So we've now finished building our fully reusable timeline that just uses classes to be fully customizable to any design you want. So I'll just open up this edit panel now. And by the way, opening this edit panel up will make sure if there's anything out of position here, I'm thinking the timeline line might be out of position. If you stretch the edit panel, it'll snap it back into place. So I'll let you go through the JavaScript in your own time if you want, but it's essentially just a few functions that make sure the timeline line is the correct height, it fills correctly, and we also get an active class added to our timeline items. We've also got some custom CSS variables added further down as well. Now, the bit I want to show you is this bit that says remove in production, because this is added so that when you're adding classes to your timeline in the CSS classes box, such as top and bottom, it makes sure that the timeline line updates its position live because if that bit of code isn't there, the timeline line always stays in the center. It doesn't do this on the front end. It's just in the back end when you're editing the timeline. So I added that bit of code to make sure it updates live, but you don't need it in production. So you can just delete this entire section when you've finished adding your classes and you know exactly what you want. So I'll now go through what some of the custom CSS is doing. And I'll start with if you're seeing a square background on your icons when they're active rather than a circular one. So if I go into custom CSS, you'll see here, I've got two selectors for point active color. One is relevant for if you're using non-optimized markup. The other is for optimized markup. So what you need to do is go into your Elementor settings. So this is the Elementor panel, click on settings, go into features and have a look if optimized markup is active for you or whether it's inactive for you. I've set mine to active. On all new installs, it'll be active by default. Otherwise, if you're building on a site that already exists before version 3.32, it'll be set to inactive by default. Figure out which one it is, active or inactive, go into your timeline and delete the one of these that you don't need. So for me, I'm using optimized markup, so I can delete this one, which is for non-optimized markup. Once you delete the one you don't need, this will fill correctly. So if you don't need the optimized markup one and you delete this one instead of the other, you'll then see your points will fill correctly, circular rather than square. So now going through some of these settings, they're quite self-explanatory, but I've got an arrow size of 25. So if I turn this to 55, you'll see that impacts the size of your arrows. So I think 25 works quite well, but you can customize that. I've also set it up for mobile. So I've shrunk it slightly for mobile because obviously you've got less room to work with. So here it's 20 and that just impacts the arrow on mobile portrait sizes. So you can just leave it as 25 as well if you want, if you don't want it to change, but I find 20 works quite well. Arrow offset, by default it's 25, but you'll see here it's for top and bottom alignment only. So if I just go into layout and set this to top, you'll notice that my arrow and my icon and meta text don't stick directly to the top because they are offset by 25. So if I set this to 0, you'll see how it messes slightly with the border radius and it doesn't look as good. So I've opened this up for you to be able to edit because you might have a larger border radius, but you can see here if I add 50, it goes further down. If I go into the layout and change it to bottom, you'll see it still works and it's 50 pixel from the bottom. So I've left that open for you guys to customize. I'll just leave it as 25. Next, we've got our timeline fill ratio, and this value basically dictates when your timeline starts filling. So currently it's 0.6, so it's near the center of the screen. And you'll notice in the comment, I've got 0 is top of screen, 1 is bottom. So if I change this to 0.9, it'll start filling much closer to the bottom of the screen. So you'll see here how it's filling pretty quickly. So I feel like 0.6, because it's near the center of the screen, it works quite well. But again, just customize this to what you want. The next two variables are our timeline colors. So we've got an empty color and a fill color. So I'll just change these to some extreme examples so you can see what they're doing. So we'll go red and blue for our empty and fill color. And you can see on the edit screen, empty, it's red, filling, it's blue. So obviously, if you want to tweak these colors, that's how easy it is to do that. Next up, we've got the active point color. So the point active color, this is the one I mentioned earlier. You will get 2 of these in the code initially, but you should have deleted one. So mine's now optimized markup. Yours might say non-optimized markup, but all this is it's the color of the point when it's active. So again, if I change this to red, you'll see it's an extreme example, but it'll go red. So I'll just undo that. Next, we've got our Elementor heading title. So this is our meta active color. So this is this title here. I've just got mine going white because it's an off-white initially. But again, I'll change it to something extreme like red and you'll see it goes red. And the next one again is the meta active color again, but this time it's when it's in the card. So if I make this tablet portrait, it's the meta title when it's in the card. So mine's a purple color at the minute or a pink color. Again, I'll just change it to blue and you'll see how that impacts the meta active color. So I'm just going to undo these changes, go back to full screen desktop. I'm also just going to get rid of the bottom alignment because I don't need that right now. But the next lot of custom CSS is based around some additional customizations. I've commented them out because I'm not using them. But the first one is the card title active color. So if you are using a heading within your cards, you can customize the active color of this as well. So I'll just make sure this isn't commented out anymore and delete this comment here. And this is basically showing that you can change the color using this code. So I've got it to go red when it becomes active. So I don't need this, so I'm just going to delete it, but that's how you would do that if you want. In the same way, if you make this not a comment anymore, you'll see that this is for card active background color. So I just delete that text and you'll see I've got it set to green on active. So if you want to add an active color to your full card background, just use this bit of code and it'll work like this. So again, I don't need that, so I'll just delete that. So you'll see here, I've got another comment that says target any other active element with selector is active and then your class name. So what I mean by that is if you wanted to change the color of any other element on your timeline when it becomes active. So let's say, like the icon changes color and the meta heading, let's say we wanted to change the color of this text editor. So I've copied selector is active and then I'm going to give a new class of active hyphen text. And I'm going to say I want the color to be red for this class. So then we just type color red. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the class name, which is active text. And I'm going to paste this. I'm going to click on the text itself, go to the advanced tab, and then I'm going to paste this class name in the CSS classes box. And you'll see straight away on scroll, when it becomes active, it turns red. So the way I've set this up basically means we can apply this for any element because this is active class here is only applied when we hit the correct point on scroll. And then if we create our own class and apply it to any element, we can then choose any custom styling we want. Again, I don't need this, so I'm just going to delete this entire comment and the selector I've just created. And you'll see now the last comment says the breakpoint by default is 1024 pixel, which is tablet portrait. And this can be changed further down in the media query. So this is when the timeline goes to its single column left aligned structure. So if you want to change at which breakpoint this occurs, just scroll down in the custom CSS until you get to this block here. And this block is just telling you what the breakpoints are. But let's say I want it now to be mobile landscape. If I change this in the media query from 1024 pixel to 880 pixel, you'll see the timeline is still center aligned on tablet portrait. But if I now go to mobile landscape, 880 pixel, this is the point it will now break. So that's how easy it is to change the breakpoint. Now we've finished going through all the custom CSS. That's everything you need to know to build your own fully customizable and reusable Elementor timeline. So if you are a pro user, I would recommend right-clicking on the main timeline container and just saving it in your cloud templates so that you can then just import it on any future website you're working on. You've already done the legwork, so you can then just tweak it with your own classes and styles. Speaking of which, I'll put the classes back on the screen now just to remind you what they are. So you have 21 design options or layout options from the 6 classes. That's the stuff of dreams. So if you have enjoyed this one, guys, let me know. Give it a like, comment, or subscribe if you're not already. And I hope to see you in the next one.